Today we are joined by Dr. Donald Grossnickle to talk about his newly published memoir, My Maja, A Grandson's Tribute. Good afternoon, Dr. Grossnickle. Glad to have you here.
Oh, I'm very happy to be here with you, Susan.
Well, thank you. First, can you tell our audience about your personal connection to the village of Addison and why your face may seem familiar to them?
I hope it's familiar. I'm really glad to be home to Addison. I was Director of Instruction, Curriculum Director at Addison Trail High School from 1985 until I retired in 2003. Many happy memories of students and parents and community. Loved Addison.
Very good. In your life as an educator, a nonprofit founder, and an ordained minister in the Roman Catholic Church, you have come to understand that people need to find and develop their own personal resilience in order to succeed in life. Can you elaborate just a bit about your concept of personal resilience?
When the going gets tough, the tough get going. So basically, I think it's bouncing back in the face of adversity. So when things are difficult, you find the spirit within to deal with things, cope maybe, or go beyond, or accept the challenges and go further.
Very good. You found your personification of this personal resilience, didn't you? Your grandmother, Maja.
I really did. I really did. She's been an extraordinary role model to me. Although she died in 1969, she's been a big part of my life ever since, inspiring me. What she endured, and I'm sure the interview will tap into some of that. She was a great lady, and I'm so happy with the book that she's no longer forgotten.
Can you describe briefly your personal relationship with your grandmother?
Well, it's pretty hard. Grandmothers are very special. To have the connection with my grandmother as a loving person, certainly an immigrant, certainly a Swede, very ethnic, was very different. So I was fascinated always with what brought her to the United States in 1922. I was always very much interested in what Sweden was like, and she rewarded me always with my questions. So she was my storyteller. We had a great magnetism. She talked, I listened. I loved being around her. Loved having sleepovers as a child. My first 5 years, I lived next door to her, although those memories are really long gone. But the memories that I have of my grandmother are extra special. And it was very easy to write this book because her spirit and her influence really has stayed with me very, very tenderly.
Well, this special relationship with your grandmother led you to do a little bit of further digging into her life. Can you share what you learned of your grandmother's life back in Sweden and why she immigrated to the U.S.?
Yes, that's a good long story. Basically, my grandmother was born of 9 children to a very wealthy family. They didn't begin being wealthy. The husband and wife became shopkeepers for delicatessen and meat packing business. So the family was well known in Sollefteå, Sweden, northern Sweden, way up at the top, toward the coast. And her life was certainly very, very busy with sisters and brothers. She was a very good student. She loved Sweden, the out of doors. Her background was that her parents were big on history and ancestry, and really educated well to be in the tradition of distinguishing herself as father and mother did in the community, and also her great-grandparents and grandparents. The history in the book dates all the way back to the early 1700s.
Wow.
The Swedes are remarkably good at keeping records. In fact, it was the rule by the government for the local ministers to keep track of every birth, every confirmation, all kinds of history. So that
Didn't
part
we
was
wish
interesting.
everybody was like that today?
Well, it would be easier certainly to work on genealogy, but her background was fascinating.
Was
in
her
Sweden.
immigrant experience typical?
I would say not. My grandmother, Maja, came to the United States in 1922, basically having heard much about the United States, a place of prosperity, unlimited opportunities. And as a wealthy person, she came with money in her pocket. She came originally to see what things were like. Her uncle, her father's brother, had talked up the United States much. He came to the United States in about 1900, became a very successful entrepreneur, a builder. After Chicago burned in 1871, there was a great need for a building to happen. And so he made a fortune, actually, in the United States, in Chicago. And so Maja came to Chicago to visit with her uncle and to see America during that time. So her story was not very typical. Many Swedes came to the United States saying things like they wanted to have land. Many of the people in Minnesota and Iowa, Nebraska came for farming. The farmland in Sweden is not the best. But her circumstance was really different. And when she came, she liked what she saw. She went to church, saw a very handsome man singing in the church choir, fell in love and romanced, and decided to stay.
So a love story.
A big romance love story.
Can you describe a little more about your grandmother's new life when she lived on the south side of Chicago?
Well, her new life was perhaps someone might say typical. She was well educated in Sweden. She went to nursing training school, which was unusual. You know, she had a heart for helping other people. So what happened to her is when she came to the United States, she fell in love. The first child, their marriage, I believe, was in 1923, January. And my mother, Dolores, the first of what would be 4 children, were born to Carl Oskar Wittenstrom and Maja Karlgren Wittenstrom in Chicago. And then for about 10 years after Dolores, another boy was born. I describe in the book, actually died the day he was born. And then another boy was born about a year later. And then another little girl, Linnea, was born a couple years later. So from 1922 to 1932, during those 10 years, Maja was a homemaker and a mom.
Okay, very good. What major events impacted her life and led to her return to Sweden in 1932?
Well, that's a big question. In 1932, the whole world kind of fell apart for Maja. It's a turning point in the book and certainly a turning point in her life. In 1932, on a Sunday morning, her husband, Carl Oskar, experienced what he thought was a stomach upset, but eventually fell on the floor in front of Maja and the children and had a fatal heart attack. During 1932 to 1929, actually, there was the U.S. Depression, and that was a big part probably of his heart disease. He had an auto repair business. Carl Oskar came from Cadillac, Michigan, actually, to Chicago, a farm boy, Swede, full 100% first generation Swede, came to Chicago to open a car business. At that time in American history, everybody was buying cars. They were affordable. And so he decided he was going to get into the car repair business. Well, in 1932, roughly, his business failed, and the stress of it all did him in. He fell over dead. And in 1932, then Maja, with 3 children now, decided that she was in trouble. So she got her passport together and took the 3 children back to her home in Sweden. In the meantime, the year before she came to the United States, her father died. So in 1921, that is. So she went back to her mother and visited with her siblings, stayed in her childhood home, and during that time tried to figure out what she was going to do with her life. Her children were American citizens, and she was a naturalized American citizen at that time. Fortunately, the husband had a life insurance policy. So the house that Maja and Carl Oskar lived in was paid for. So Maja went back to Sweden to try to figure out what she was going to do with her life. Spent a year there. My mother went to school in Sweden. She was old enough to go to school, and said that she had a very terrible time when she re-entered. Getting ahead of myself, they came back to the United States. Maja decided that she was going to use her Swedish grit and gumption and American rugged individualism, and they were together going to be a family that was going to beat the Great Depression. So that's kind of what happened beginning in 1932.
So in 33, they come back to the States. How is her life, her family's life, different than it was prior to them going to Sweden?
Susan, upside down. Okay. Fortunately, she had her nursing degree to fall back on. Fortunately, she was, like all the children, the Karlgren, Kjellgren children, immersed in business. So they knew how to operate stores and work hard every day with the family. And she converted the upstairs of her home into a boarding house. So the family all lived in one bedroom downstairs and toward the dining room of a nice Chicago bungalow. And Maja then went to work serving wealthy people. The Great Depression, like some of this COVID virus, affects the population in different ways. Maja was destitute. She had no money, and basically, fortunately, she had her nursing degree to fall back on. So she opened up a nursing service, and every day from 3 o'clock or so, she got on the streetcars and went to wealthy people's homes. The hospital structure was very different then. And Maja would care for people that were homebound as a nurse from 3 o'clock in the afternoon until 7 or 8 in the morning.
Wow.
The next day, took the streetcar back home, got the children back to school, and then took care of the boarding house. So Maja's stress and strain during that particular time, physically, emotionally, spiritually, was really, really tough. But she was a tough lady, and that's, I think, what inspired me to write this book, is asking the question that you're asking. What happened during that time, and how was she strong enough to be able to handle it?
Very good. In your family history research, you, like many others, discovered some things that you didn't know about your grandmother's life. I think you call them in the book family secrets. What were some of these things that you found out, and how did they impact you?
Well, I don't want to completely give away all the family secrets. You know, when you're an author, you know, you write with a certain style. And two of the secrets I will not spoil today for the readers. I hope some will read, but I'll give you certainly the first one, which I've already mentioned.
Okay.
A family secret that Maja never mentioned was the birth and death of the second son, the first son actually. So I think that Maja kept pretty much to herself. Swedes have a reputation actually of not discussing family business. So, but on the other hand, I heard hundreds and hundreds of stories from her, but I was a bit surprised that she never revealed the fact is that, you know, that they had lost a child. But that was one of them. And the other two are much more highly dramatic about the secrets. And quite frankly, Susan, I started out writing this book pretty much after retirement with the idea that I wanted people to know about her life in Sweden, and particularly about her struggle. And it was a feel-good story about my grandmother and me. And then, you know, I discovered these family secrets through photos. And then the skeletons in Maja's closet came out to dance. And then a much more serious aspect of the book when I really wanted the reading public to know how difficult it was during the Great Depression. And So I think that kind of leads us into the secrets.
Okay. In the book, you share 10 life lessons that your grandmother instilled in you as a boy. Which of these skills do you think was the most essential to you?
I think that's a hard question because the life lessons really are part of my character. I think that my career as a teacher, the desire to help others, to be self-sacrificing in a way, the kind of work that you do as an educator, grading papers, writing lesson plans, caring about others, certainly was a big one. Probably the biggest story, I think, in Maja's life that touched me was to be selfless as it relates to giving yourself to others. Basically, I'll give you a little foreshadowing of the secrets, is that things were very, very difficult for Maja emotionally and physically, and it had a destructive impact on her. But she was driven throughout, okay, not for herself. She was committed to raising those children with the ethic of rugged individualism and everything that it took for them to be team members, to love each other. And the Great Depression is a great storybook all by itself. Mm-hmm. You know, about saving everything and looking out for others, trying to take care of the person that comes to the door with a little bit of food. So I think that the emphasis that I really want to make in this book is that Maja's life really was given toward others.
Very good. Well, thank you very much for coming in today and sharing your grandmother's personal story of independence, perseverance, and resilience. How can people find your book?
Well, mostly on Amazon.com. Amazon is the publisher of the book and distributor at the moment, and we expect that it's pretty early in the whole history of the book.
Why don't you show our audience the cover of the book?
This is the book cover. It's my Maja. Somebody might say it's Maja. Okay, Maja is really Swedish for Marie. The book cover was designed by a good friend of mine. Both the front and the back are beautiful. We've got the Swedish flag here. And the subtitle of the book is A Grandson's Tribute. I want to mention, Susan, before we leave, that there have been many books written about the forgotten men of the Great Depression. When the Great Depression hit, men's livelihood were disaffected, and it really affected the family. So to have someone who's unemployed living in the home can be quite distressing and depressing. There's almost nothing written about women. And some of the fascinating part about this story of writing this book is to learn about Eleanor Roosevelt. Eleanor Roosevelt was a home ec teacher before she married FDR, and she was a big influence speaking to the women, claiming, I think rightfully, that the women really had the potential to reverse all of the stress and strain of the Great Depression. So Maja was a case in point. And it was very important for me to make a statement that why is it so that the women of the Great Depression have been kind of cast aside and silenced in a sense. So some of this book is written in righteous indignation on my part, where I really wanted Maja's story to be told not only for our personal side, but not only for her success and resilience, as you say, but also to make a very point that history has not done a good job for the women of the Great Depression, who are full of valor and are my heroes.
Well, thank you again so very much for coming in this afternoon and sharing this unique story of an individual woman and some of the challenges that she faced.
You're most welcome, Susan. I appreciate the invitation to be back home in Addison.
Thank you.